Welcome back everyone, it's Anthony with AZ Overland. Today, we're going to be back on the 5th Gen 4Runner doing a rear disc brake job. My goal is to show you that doing a brake job doesn't have to be intimidating. I'm going to try to break it down and make it as simple as possible. Keep in mind that even though this is a 5th Gen 4Runner, that doing disc brakes on other vehicles, all the things that we do today will apply to those as well, for the most part. There is one caveat, however, on doing the rear brakes that don't apply to front disc brakes, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Because I have a lot of added weight on the 4Runner here, and because I do some towing with a little trailer, I'm going to do a little upgrade on the brakes. Most of the work we do on disassembly will take place in the back of the rotor over here, that's where our bolts are located. I use a wire hanger, a good quality wire hanger, because when we take the caliper apart, that's where we're going to hang it from so it doesn't dangle and put stress on the brake line. On the back of the calipers here, we have the caliper itself, and that has the two slide bolts, which are both right here. Those are 17 millimeter, and the good news is the caliper bracket, also two bolts, 17 millimeter. So what we're going to do first is remove the caliper and hang it on that little wire I was showing you earlier. Take the slide pins out right here. You're going to get a lot of dust and brake cleaner as you start to clean everything up go down, so I always put a metal pan underneath. Caliper will kind of just shimmy out. And now you have the brake line right here, which you don't want to put tension on. Just to show you the inside real quickly, this is the piston, and that's what pushes the brake pads into the rotor. Now this needs to be retracted, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. This right here is the bleeder valve, and some people will, which I'm not going to do today, is they'll remove the cap of the bleeder valve, they'll crack it open, and when they retract the piston pin here, they'll let the brake fluid come out. I don't believe that's necessary. However, some people believe that that is something that needs to be done. Okay, so next we're going to remove the two bolts here, which are also 17, and that'll be the caliper bracket. Caliper bracket still has the brake pads. I'm going to leave those intact. I like to look at them and refer to the placement. Sometimes the pads are different, they're not always the same. So I'll take them out one at a time and compare them to the new pads. So with the caliper bracket out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and retract the piston and the caliper. I removed the caliper from the hanger so I can give a better view here. So here's the piston, and the piston has to be pushed back and flush here. So I'm going to use, there's a lot of different tools to do this with. This actual C-clamp is what I've used on brake jobs that I've done since the early 90s. I still have the same C-clamp. So right now I'm tightened up, and I'm going to go ahead and push that piston back in nice and slowly. There's a rubber boot that's around the piston, and you want to keep an eye on that to make sure it doesn't mushroom out. If I was having a difficult time getting this piston to go back in, I would crack that bleeder valve that I showed you earlier, and we just let the brake fluid come out into a container below. But it's going back real easily. Okay, so I'll loosen it back up, and we'll get it ready for the other side. So you don't need any, okay. Just before I hang that back up, you can see here how everything is nice and flush, and we're gonna clean this area as well. Today, the upgrade for the brakes to the Z36, which are the Extreme Powerstop. So I've used Powerstop before. I actually used this on the car I raced on my Hellcat. I love the brakes. They performed exceptionally well, and another benefit that I really love about them is they have a very low dust, so you're not cleaning your wheels all the time. But this is made for more towing applications and more extreme duty. They do make a regular version of this too, which is very, very good, but because of the weight, as I mentioned earlier, and the towing that I do with the 4Runner, this is the next step above for those situations. Carbon fiber and ceramic on the pads, and then the rotors are drilled and slotted so they cool better and clean better too. It comes with everything in the kit, including the lube, but I always have my own lube. Always have brake cleaner on hand to clean these parts up nice. Let's make sure we have the right parts. What I like to do is take out You can hear they're squeaking, which means that's probably why I heard the sound that I heard. So this is one side and the other side. All right, so I like to keep everything in order so I remember how it goes back. So this one actually has the wear indicator on it, and that's going to make sure I put it on this side here. I want to put it exactly where it came from. And it was worn down quite a bit. I was getting a lot of squealing on the right rear. The left rear, not so much, but you can see how thin, hopefully that'll focus in, how thin that pad is. And it's almost down to the backing plate here. Let's take out all these clips. And like I said, I like to keep these in order too. So I'll put this one on the top and this one on the bottom. On these caliper brackets, the surfaces here where those clips just came out, they have to be super clean. If they're not clean, you're gonna have issues with clearance. So I usually clean these up with a wire brush. We're in Arizona, so the weather is dry. We don't get snow and salt, so these are actually super clean. They are dusty, which is to be expected, but they don't have any rust or corrosion underneath those clips. And if you have rust or corrosion, you definitely want to, if the wire brush doesn't work for you, you can use a wire wheel or a file, as long as you're not taking material off. Just make sure the surfaces are clean. And then I'll hit it with a little brake cleaner. Looks like we got to put brake cleaner on the list. This guy's getting a little low. The surface is nice and clean there. We have no corrosion underneath. We're going to inspect the boots here. The boots are a little dry, so I'm going to remove the boot. It's just a press fit in there. And before I put the new boot on, I'm actually going to do a little cleaning in there. Here's the other boot. This is the longer one. So we have two different size boots. There's a little groove in the boot right here, and that's the part that's actually going to go in and hold it in place. So you can squeeze it in. And you can see that one's in place. This is the longer boot here. So we're going to pull this out. This is actually super clean, this boot. And we'll put the new one in here. It is a little tight to get in there, so there's a couple methods to use. I think we're going to just put just a little bit of grease on there just to get it moving. And then pushing it in, it's a little difficult to get all the way in. So we can do two things. I'm going to use the actual slide pin, which I cleaned up. I wanted to make sure it was nice and clean before I put any kind of, introduce any kind of dirt into it. And I'm going to try to use this to push it in there. If this doesn't work, I have a punch that I'll use. So it's going in right now. And then the back should pop out right here. I wanted to show you all the lube points together. So the slide pins are lube point number 1. Make sure they're clean. They don't require a lot of lube. And you could use the silicone, or I use the synthetic grease. And then we'll push that in, and we'll get ready for install. Some people lube underneath the anti-rattle clips. I don't see a need to lube under there. I would think the only advantage is if you live in a rust belt and you get a lot of corrosion or rust under there, it'll help prevent that. So they're going to go dry. They do have little inner tabs too, and you want to make sure that those hook on. There you go, and then you could actually hear an audible click. Make sure your hands are clean when handling the new brake pads. You don't want any grease or dirt on the face. Now you can put the brake pads in now, or you can wait and put the caliper back together and then put the brake pads on. I've done it both ways. I don't necessarily have a preference. What I do like to do, and for some reason this becomes controversial, I don't know why, but I put a little grease, not a lot, just a little bit of grease inside these grooves right here on the anti-rattle clips. This is where the brake pad slides in and out, so it can reduce the chance of noise, and you don't need a lot, just a little on each surface. Let's go bring this over, and we have a couple of areas to lube up. We'll get this area set now. We're going to replace the rotor. Now on the 4Runner, we have the emergency brake is actually located behind this piece here, which makes removing the rotor hard sometimes. So if we have a problem removing the rotor, I'm going to show you how to deal with that. Actually, if we twist it, there should be some drag, which there is. So this rotor is coming off, which means you can see all the dust inside here too. So we'll do a little cleaning up on this area. There's a lot of dust over here. These are the brake shoes for the emergency brake. So when you hit the emergency brake, these extend and they lock up the rotors. If this rotor wouldn't come off, I'm going to show you what you need to do. There's a star adjuster. There's a star adjuster. See it right here? There's like these little ribs on it. So when you have the rotor on, you want to do is line up the hole down to the bottom. Then you take a screwdriver, you stick it in that hole, and you can actually push down on that star adjuster, and that'll loosen up these shoes. So that star adjuster expands and contracts the shoes depending on which way you turn. Let's put this guy back on, and I'll show you. These have holes, so you want to get this hole. You can line it up, you'll see. You'll stick a screwdriver in there. You'll feel for that star adjuster, and then you'll click it. And we're going to have to do that when we put the new rotor on, because we're going to need a little bit of tension on here to make sure that the emergency brake is adjusted correctly. It's also important, and you're going to see little areas here where the rotor sits, that needs to be all cleaned up. Especially if you live in a rust belt, you want that clean. The rotor must sit flush. And the wheel on top of the rotor also must sit flush. Once again, because we live in Arizona, we're pretty lucky. So we'll just clean this up a little bit. Make sure that rotor sits nice and flush. That's why I keep a little metal pan underneath. Once we do the cleaning, I don't want that on my garage floor. These rotors are directional. When you're using a slotted rotor, you got to make sure you're putting it on the right side. These are labeled. This is the rear passenger side. In addition, sometimes they come with a little bit of a coating so they don't rust. So I'll always do a quick clean on new rotors. Once this is clean, you don't want to touch it with your hands. This one actually, I'm not getting really anything off of, which is nice. These are pretty. We're going to make sure that one of our holes line up so we can do the emergency brake adjustment as well. You can also, if you want to do it by hand a little bit before you put it on. So I'm turning that up. You want a slight drag on the rotor, just like that. This is all good. We're going to finish putting the caliper back on. Before we do that, I'm going to do a light coat of grease on the shim of the pad. There's still a very light coat right here. We'll do a quick brake cleaner. We're going to do just a little bit of lube on the legs and then right around the piston. Just pull the slide pins back out. Everything is all lubed up. And the slide pins, I'm just going to hit them with a little touch of grease. Make sure everything is clean. We have no grease anywhere it doesn't need to be. This side is done. Don't forget to remove your wire hanger so you don't leave it in the frame or in the coil spring. Just a couple things to note. Make sure that the surfaces of the rotor remain clean and free of grease and lube. Make sure that the new pads do not have grease or lube on them. The surfaces are nice and clean. And most importantly, and this is what a lot of new people doing brakes forget, which can be very dangerous, is make sure before you drop your car and pull it out of the garage that you pump the brakes and make sure you get a nice firm brake feel. After you do a brake job, you'll push the brakes, it'll go right down to the floor and you're not going to have braking power. So pump those brakes before you pull the car out and remain safe, please. Also make sure that you're jacked up correctly and you have jack stands if you're working anywhere near. You'll see I have heavy duty jack stands on both sides and I keep the jack in place just in case. I always have a backup plan when I am working on a car or under a car. I will leave links below also to the rear brake kit that I use from Powerstop, the Extreme kit. I'll leave a link to their regular kit as well. They do make a front and a rear kit. However, I found it was cheaper to actually order them separately, so I did not order them as a kit. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. I do answer all of them. I appreciate each and every one of you watching. Remember, life begins where the pavement ends. I'll see you in the next one, guys.